if you're a child of the 70s or 80s, you grew up at some point listening to Van Halen or at least being extremely familiar with Van Halen. And you may have even heard the story of No Brown M&Ms. The No Brown M&Ms is an example of how we as entrepreneurs, as product marketers, product managers can do a better job of protecting all the hard work we do developing the products that we do and selling the products that we do. We're going to talk about that this week. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Productize or Perish podcast, where creativity meets strategy and ideas turn into revenue. I'm your host, Craig Davis, founder of Azola Creative, and each week we focus on discovering new and creative product marketing strategies. We like to hear from real world success stories from people like you and share new and creative ways that you can dominate in your market. Now, this week's quote is: "There will be no brown M&Ms in the backstage area upon paying a forfeiture of the show with full compensation." Van Halen. Now, let me back up and kind of tell you a little bit about why we're going to talk about the no brown M&Ms clause in Van Halen's contracts. And where it starts with is the importance of terms and conditions, some of the positives, some of the negatives, and some things that you need to do to be a little bit more, I think, clean and simple with your terms and conditions. So let me first start off by just telling you about the Van Halen story. So for those of you that may not be aware, depending on your age or awareness of the band Van Halen, but obviously in the 70s, 80s, 90s, Van Halen was a dominating force in the music industry. Obviously, there's two versions of Van Halen, which are controversial, and I'm not here to settle whether or not David Lee Roth's Van Halen was better than Sammy Hagar's Van Halen. In fact, I think this is probably where the rub is a little bit. When you look at the success of Van Halen, Sammy Hagar's era had a lot more hits, probably a lot more top 40 hits for the band, versus when David Lee Roth was in the band. But that in itself is some of the reasons why people don't like the Hagar Van Halen versus the David Lee Roth. But again, this is something that will remain controversial for rock fans forever until the argument just kind of dies out. But the point being in this story is that we're going to start with the David Lee Roth era of Van Halen. And the reason why is because that is really where this whole No Brown M&Ms thing started. So to back up again, going back into the late 70s is when Van Halen hit the big time. They had some hits. Actually did a lot more covers in their early days compared to original music. Not that they weren't doing original music, but they just had more covers than people would probably expect. And then they grew into their own for sure. And obviously 1984 was one of their biggest hits that had Jump, Hot for Teacher, gosh, what else? Panama. I mean, all kinds of classic hits on that album. It's also about the era that David Lee Roth left the band, whether by force or by choice. So the band was huge, and David Lee Roth obviously is an incredibly big personality. And they had in their contract, in their writers, when they go to each show and a band goes to a new venue, there's a writer that talks about everything from the equipment that's required to where all the stage placement needs to be. There's a map, everything is completely detailed out as part of that contract. And in their writer, they had a request that there will be no brown M&Ms in the backstage area upon paying a forfeiture of the show with full compensation. That was the legal language that they had in their contract. So the story came out as far as like from the folklore was that these guys are just such prima donnas that they're so just pretentious rock stars that they demand that there be no brown M&Ms in the backstage area. Like, what? Come on, who do these guys think they are? Like, all that kind of stuff that you think about somebody who's like just that pretentious. And they certainly loved the story. I mean, it wasn't something that they were necessarily trying to shoot down. It was kind of fun for them for that to be kind of like some folklore of them that they had this demand. But the truth in the whole thing, and this is David Lee Roth personally explained this, the truth of it was that it was for a safety reason. At the time, Van Halen's equipment, all that gear and the lighting and sound equipment that they were bringing on their tours was pretty massive and somewhat ahead of its time for a lot of venues that they were playing at. So there were venues that quite possibly couldn't safely hold that equipment. So there were, along with that Brown M&M request, was that there were a lot of safety standards that had to be met. And they tell a story about how sometimes they would actually go. Well, I guess like at least one time in particular that he mentioned. He said it happened in multiple venues, but one he went into one time, and there was this little old lady who was sitting down in the backstage area, picking out all of the Brown M&Ms as they were coming in. And so the whole point of it actually was that that language around the Brown M&Ms was buried deep in the contract, along with all of the safety standards. So that was their way of ensuring that the venue they were going to play at had actually read all of the contract language to be sure that the safety standards had been read and were met. Because as we all know, it's really easy to gloss over pages and pages of terms and conditions. We do it on a regular basis whenever we're signing up for something online, and we're going to get into that. But that was really the point of it. It wasn't because it was this whole prima donna kind of thing. It was because they wanted to make sure that their shows were going to be done safely for both themselves as well as the audience. And so they knew that if you had brown M&Ms and backstage, then you didn't read through properly. Whereas if there were no brown M&Ms backstage, they knew that you actually had done your homework and had read everything thoroughly. And so I think it's a fun story, obviously. And again, I mean, I remember hearing that story as a kid, and just, again, like I said, you just think like, what? Well, come on, who are these guys? But then to hear what the real reason was is pretty cool because, David Lee Roth, I think, as outlandish as he is as a personality, is actually, I've heard a lot of stories about him behind the scenes and just what a disciplined, talented, and I think caring guy, but he's not that comfortable with being seen that way. So he's that personality that he is, And I mean, I'm sure, like in those early days, he was definitely, partaking in a lot of extracurricular activities around being a rock star at the same time, which made him that much more outlandish. But I just think it's actually a really cool thing that was their way of being able to just kind of test people on whether or not they read the terms and conditions. So that in turn is going to go into what we talk about today, and that is going to be the idea of, are there no brown M&Ms in your terms and conditions? With with contracts, when you're telling, or I'm sorry, when you're negotiating a contract, a lot of times there's an opportunity, like if it's a hard copy contract, there's an opportunity to redline details. I mean, that's unfortunately why sometimes when it comes to product sales, it can take forever because you have lawyers going back and forth redlining every detail. And so depending on how complex the contract is, that can really delay the process of closing deals. And so it's frustrating, and that's something that I try to work towards trying to clean that up more because again, in more of that e-commerce kind of mindset, your terms and conditions are already baked out. They're very, very clear, at least from one side. And that is kind of the first issue that I want to talk about today, is just the fact that, when it comes to having like your terms and conditions, you have to be careful about how people are reading them and how you're actually displaying them. And I'll give you an example. There were some legal cases that I think it goes back to 2022, But there were a couple of legal cases where websites had clear terms and conditions, or so they thought. They thought it would clear terms and conditions, but it was argued in court that the terms and conditions were not clear. It was not clear where to read them, and it kind of got buried in details, et cetera, et cetera. It was really complex, really poor readability and just, kind of lacked transparency. There were all these different things that had been kind of a factor and the challenge to the online terms and conditions. And the plaintiffs won on that, and that they were trying to uh, just get their money back, return on whatever it was that they bought, and it worked. So that's one of the things that we need to look at is, everything, even if we're not doing business 100% online, terms and conditions are a requirement, and you have to be really clear about what your terms and conditions are. Even now, here's the thing. One of these cases talked about just the arbitration. So in most contracts, there's some clause around arbitration who covers the legal costs if there is a challenge, et cetera, et cetera. Well, in this one case, they didn't have that language in their terms and conditions. And so that became an issue for them as well. And so when you're thinking about your terms and conditions, it's it really is best. I mean, again, to go through an attorney. There are a lot of online versions that you can use out there to develop terms and conditions. Um, Now with ChatGPT, I'm sure there's a lot of ways you could do it as well. But when you're talking about a potential lawsuit, it is really, you know, again, trying to avoid the idea of multiple red lines of going back and forth in contract language with people. It's worth it just to get your terms and conditions reviewed by an attorney so that at least on your side, you have everything buttoned up. And, if the redlining is just more for your own sake of making sure that you have truly correct and sound terms and conditions that can protect you, because that's ultimately what it's about from your standpoint. But the other issue is that it's the customer experience. I mean, we all do it. You download something and they give you just scroll after scroll after scroll of terms and conditions, and most of us just lose sight of it and we say, okay, fine, whatever. But there's a plus and a minus to that, I think. In one case, it can be very dangerous because, again, let's take, for example, something that's a really large, like thousands and thousands of dollars ticket item that you're buying through an online channel. That's a little riskier just to blindly look at the terms and conditions because, that's a huge risk. Whereas when you're buying something a little bit smaller with less risk, it can also simplify what your terms and conditions are. So that kind of feeds into the whole idea of the productize or perish is that the more you can productize and simplify the things that you're doing, the better off everything is, including your terms and conditions. It's just so important for you to think about how to create more sales efficiency, which is what our online terms and conditions can do for you. But, you know, you also have to be really careful that you're not selling everything under the sun under those same T's and C's, because there could be a situation where it doesn't match completely. So you have to kind of, depending on what you're selling, depending on the size of your product portfolio, the scope of it, as far as like what types of services you do, those are things that you need to be kind of looking at and thinking about. I'm going to pause right here for a moment because I want to talk to you about the SMB marketing blueprint. Now, I've mentioned this before, and the reality is that a lot of business leaders, whether you're a small business owner, or solopreneur, an entrepreneur, or even in the C-suite, there's a huge distrust in marketing. Over 80% of CEOs do not trust marketers. And the issue comes down to the idea of just not understanding what the marketing is doing, not understanding what kind of marketing you should be doing for your business. And if you're using, leveraging freelancers or agencies or even hiring people, making sure that you hire the right people. I can't tell you how many times I've unfortunately seen the wrong marketing person be hired based on their skill set. And then they go into a situation where there's things they're being asked to do that are not in their wheelhouse. But unfortunately, the employer didn't understand what they were even hiring for. They just hear marketing. And quite frankly, I can walk into a room and talk about marketing, and it means something different to everybody. For some people, it means social media. For some, it means email. For some, it means their website. For some, it means SEO or PPC or something like that. I mean, there's so many different things that marketing means, and it's truly like the ear of the beholder as to what that marketing role should be based on what they think marketing is. So the point of the SMB marketing blueprint is I'm trying to help alleviate that. It's a 7-day free email course where you sign up and each day you're going to get an email lesson. And in that lesson, it will start to break down all these different levels of what marketing is and what it isn't, and help you start to really be able to more clearly define what marketing channels might be right for your business, what kind of things to stay away from. What are things and ways that you would might communicate in different marketing channels based on your business? And at the end, you're going to have the tools to be able to develop your own marketing blueprint. Now, I'm not saying your marketing blueprint will be done within 7 days, but by 7 days, you're going to have the tools and understanding of how to use them the right way. And so this is really beneficial for two different people. If you're a marketer, this is going to be helpful for you to be able to help articulate better to maybe some of the people that you have to report into and help them understand marketing in a different way. And then for people that are hiring marketers, whether again, freelancers, agencies, employees, whatever it is, it's going to make you a lot stronger as a partner to your marketing team and being able to understand what it is that they're doing. So it's a win-win scenario. Go to blueprint.azulacreative.com and you can sign up for the 7-day free email course, the SMB Marketing Blueprint. All right, let's talk about how to wrap up a nice T&C little package on your website. Now, like I said, it's really important for you to be thinking about going to an attorney and be sure that you're talking to that attorney and getting anything. I mean, they're going to know what to ask for. You go to the right kind of attorney. Look for somebody who does business with people that do business online. They're gonna understand what you need to look at to a certain extent. But what I would also recommend is that you want to kind of really look at trying to balance the approach in the way that you spell out the information that are in your terms and conditions. Wherever possible, I know there's certain legalese kind of talk that you have, but wherever you can, try to simplify away from you, like try to use more plain language versus just all the legal speak, because it gets to a point where sometimes it feels like you're reading Shakespeare and no one even knows what they're saying yes to, or no to. So there are some very basic levels around what you can do, but just try and see what you can do to say, okay, working with your attorney, and this might, again, there'll be a little bit of upfront cost because you're working with an attorney on it, but you're going to get it right the first time versus doing it wrong. So, and that can be costly. So work with them to first understand, like, let's get the legal mumbo jumbo in there. That's fine. But then from there, let's break it down and make it a little bit more simple for people to understand. Also, if you can, try to provide more easy to read summary along with those terms. Because let's face it, you know how it is. You go to a doctor's office and they're having you sign off like 15 or 20 things that you have to initial or check. But then there's usually a summary as to what it means. And you're like, okay, so you're basically saying I have to pay the bill if my insurance company doesn't pay. But you had to tell me that in 15 or 20 bullet points that I had to initial. But the summary helps because now you understand what you're actually agreeing to. And that's where you can say, okay, if you're not going to use your lawyer for that part, like let the lawyer make sure you understand what that lawyer put in that contract, but then you can write that summary just so that people understand better what the spirit of all of that legal language is about. Another thing is going to be, again, making sure that you have it easy to find. Standard practice, best practice is really to put it in the footer of your website because the footer is going to be something that everybody sees on every single page. So it's always going to be there. Make sure it's not hidden in color. That was one of the issues with that legal bout that one of those companies went through. Make sure there's no if your footer is black, make the terms and conditions link white. Whatever really strong contrasting color, so it's very clear that that's where it is. In other words, there's no argument that could come back that says, "Hey, I didn't even see it. I didn't even know it was there." If you have some type of email lead capture form, make sure when they're clicking a button, if you have your terms and conditions linked in there, so that it's there that they can read and they can go through before they sign up if they need to. And usually that falls more around privacy policy, which I think the same rules apply here. What I'm talking about, privacy policy, terms and conditions, two different things, but the same principle. So make sure you have that privacy policy easy for people to find. Again, put it in the footer. If you're selling product, if let's say, for example, you have a landing page, and number one, a lot of times landing pages are done more custom and they don't necessarily fit everything that the website has. And sometimes you get rid of the header or you get rid of the standard footer that's on your website. Make sure that you have your terms and conditions and privacy policy in those new footers. Don't just erase them because it's part of some campaign and you kind of, got sloppy or lazy about it. Make sure that even those pages with all the other custom stuff, be sure that that's standard in your footer. And then when you're selling something, again, if that landing page goes to a checkout page, make sure the checkout page has the terms and conditions linked. Don't say, well, hey, it was on the core website and I can't help it that you clicked away from it, went over and bought something over here. No, like that's probably the most critical point of when you need to be sure that your terms and conditions are there. Now, again, this is going to be extra work, and that's why people don't want to do it. It's extra money going to an attorney, it's extra work having it all done. And people say, I'll just roll with it and take the risk. You don't want to be on the wrong side of that, though. You don't want to be on the wrong side of taking a risk just because you thought, I'm small. No one's going to sue me over this, or this product causes no harm. I mean, I'll tell you a really quick story. Years ago, I worked at a company, and there was a gentleman there I'd never met a person like him before, again, which thankfully, but he's out there. He had his lawyer on speed dial for everything. There was a guy doing like mowing his lawn who did something, damaged something in his grass or something like that. I can't remember what the detail was as far as what they did, but something that I think a lot of people would just say, okay, well, that stinks. We'll fix it. Even give the provider, an opportunity to replace whatever it was if it was something broken or whatever. No, as soon as he heard that it happened, he was on the phone with his attorney. There are people out there that we all know, like, I mean, the term sue happy, it's out there. So try to do whatever you can to protect yourself from even the smallest discrepancies when it comes to the terms and conditions that you provide. Make sure that you have the no Brown M&M policy. Make sure that there's something in your terms and conditions, and if you have to bury it low and towards the end, bury it. Give yourself something that would make somebody pause before they buy. I know I'm not trying to say let's slow down the sale, but if you have something complex where terms and conditions could be a really big risk for you, you might need to think about finding your own Brown M&M clause in the contracts that you have, just so that you have the ability to argue. And here's the thing, you always have to. The terms and conditions are the ugly side of your product. Everybody wants to be fun and rosy and happy, and we're all happy that we're going to solve it. We're solving your problem. You're going to buy our product. We're going to solve it for you. The best thing ever. Everybody's going to be harmonious. Well, unfortunately, that obviously doesn't always happen. There's buyer's remorse. There's all kinds of different things that happen. That's why attorneys are the way they are. I mean, like I think a lot of attorneys I know could be somewhat pessimist, like are very cautiously optimistic about things, just because they deal in things going wrong. Their biggest value probably is protecting someone when something goes wrong. So they're always thinking about what can go wrong. That's why an attorney is really valuable in this whole process, is that You are on the positive, happy side of it. Yeah, I believe in what I've got. This is going to be huge. It's going to be massive, and you're going to love everything that I ever do. I need a counterpoint to that. All the optimism and spirit that I might have for something that I'm doing, I need a counterpoint. Going back to the episode on Elton John and Barney Taupin, the art of creating more of a complementary kind of partnership. I need that partnership. And then I need somebody who's saying, yeah, but what if it doesn't happen? What if they don't love it? What if they don't want to pay you the rest of the money? What if they want their money back? What if they claim this or that? There's all these things that, like, quite frankly, as an entrepreneur, you don't want to think about because it could just cripple you, like paralyze you and worry. And then it makes it slower for you to launch things. It makes it slower for you to go actually into a sale if you're always worried about what can go wrong. Like that's not the world you want to be in that part of it. You always need to be thinking about what can go right. But the attorney's job is to help you think about what can go wrong so that they protect you. And that is what I hope that all of you will take uh, kind of heed in the warning of protect yourself. Be sure your homework this week is start looking into attorneys. Check your value prop, or I just said value proposition. That's where my head is because I'm always thinking about value propositions. Check your terms and conditions and think about where they're placed on your website. Are they easy to find? Are they on every page? And did you write them yourself? Do you even have them at all? But did you write them yourself? Did you use AI? Whatever ways you wrote it, if it's not done by an attorney, I would be a little nervous to go into the market with that. Um, I don't have I'm not I don't I don't represent any attorneys. I don't know who you should call, right? But I just know that you should look at it that way. There are some things you can go to an accountant for. There are some things you can do on your own. There's some things you could do things a little bit kind of, the do-it-yourself way. But when it comes to your contract language and terms and conditions, you need the attorney because guess what? If you do it wrong, you're going to meet the attorney in a different way. You're going to meet them on the after effect of it, the backside of it, where now they've got to go unwind all the things you did wrong. And there's nothing worse. Let me tell you, there's nothing worse than having an attorney ask you questions about did you do this? Did you say that? Did you have that in the contract? Did this happen? And your answers are no. Oh, because they make you feel stupid for it. I mean, they'll like it, you'll feel the pain because they're going to come down to the point where they're going to have some hard, hard, hard facts for you. You don't want to be on that side of it. So anyway, homework for the week is go find your Brown M&Ms in your terms and conditions and be sure that you're focused on protecting your business. You've worked too hard dreaming about what you have. You've worked too hard building what it is you're building. It's too much for you to just go cheap and uh, even just lazy on how do you protect yourself to the nth degree of keeping all the things that you've built. And so it doesn't do damage to you. All right, final note before we pause. How's that for a motivational message? I'm scaring the heck out of you this week about the idea of you better get your terms and conditions in place. But as a final note, I just want to mention again, I'd love to hear from you. If you have questions or comments or success stories, things that you're thinking about when it comes to the way you're marketing your product or developing a product, or even, hey, you're just looking for advice about who to call as an attorney. I probably am not the guy to contact for that. But I'll just tell you, go to azolacreative.com/podcast. And there you have an opportunity to fill out a form, ask me anything or tell me anything, whatever it is, and it'll come in, and then it might be something that we could talk about in a future episode. So that's it. Again, zolacreative.com/podcast. And other than that, we're going to wrap it up for the week. I hope, again, as an entrepreneur, you're supposed to be thinking about not all the things that can go wrong, but all the things that can go right. However, go get that attorney so that they can worry about the things that can go wrong. All right, talk to you all next week.